So welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I'm really excited. It's our first kind of evening event for the Edinburgh Science Festival this year. We're really excited to be able to put on a whole eclectic mix of events this evening. We've got a few other free online evening talks. So I will share a link at the end of the chat, but you can find all of the information online on our Edinburgh Zoo website. It's your best bet to go to for that. But this evening, I'm really excited to bring together three speakers who actually, despite working closely together on all sorts of things referencing Budongo, which I'll come on to shortly, this is the first event of its kind. So welcome, and you're here for a very exciting evening. So before I get too carried away, I just wanted to briefly introduce you all. When I talk about RZSS, I'm talking about the conservation charity that runs Edinburgh Zoo and Highland Wildlife Park, and we work on projects all over the world, as well as having these two amazing bases here in Scotland. And our mission is to connect people with nature and to safeguard species from extinction. And we actually work on 23 projects around the world. Everything from tiny pine hoverflies up in the Cairngorms to giant armadillos in Brazil. And this evening we're going to be traveling to East Africa and Uganda and looking at one of our longest standing conservation partnerships with the Budongo Conservation Field Station. And it's that partnership that's led to the naming of our Budongo Trail at Edinburgh Zoo, the home of our chimps, and its research facility, the Budongo Research Unit, actually within that enclosure. And this evening, I'm delighted to introduce you to Donald Gow, who is the Budongo team leader, looking after all of the chimps in the zoo, to Kate Grounds, who coordinates all the research. We collaborate with St Andrews, and to Dr. Helen Sen, who is the head of conservation and science at the RZSS. And Helen is responsible for managing our partnership with the Budongo Conservation Field Station in Uganda. So we're going to be traveling all over the world this evening. And I am sharing my screen, so I'm going to be coordinating the slides, but just so you can have a visual of who you're going to be hearing from, we've got Helen, photo on the top left, then Donald, and then Kate. And I also wanted to point out David Erienyi, who is the new director at the Budongo Conservation Field Station. David is based out in Uganda and so has managed to get out of his talk this evening with poor internet connection. But I think we'd all much rather be in a rainforest this evening. But David and his team are responsible for all of the work that Helen's going to be talking about out in Uganda this evening. And we've been partnered with David and his predecessor, Fred, for over 16 years and counting now. So it's a fantastic relationship and something that all visitors to the zoo are helping to support. And so without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Donald, and we're going to start off our journey this evening at Edinburgh Zoo. So over to you, Donald. Thank you.
Evening, everybody. Yes, just to introduce myself, I'm Donald Gow. I've been a zookeeper at Edinburgh Zoo for over 20 years now, mainly working with primates, and I've been in my current role as the Budongo and Living Links team leader for 6 years now. Next slide, please. So yeah, why at Edinburgh Zoo and RZSS are we championing chimps? Well, you know, chimps are one of my favourite animals, and I'm sure they're very enigmatic and charismatic animals. They're very popular at the zoo. But one of the main reasons is that we help fund the BTFS, the conservation project out in Uganda. And it's all about people coming to the zoo, seeing our group of chimps here, learning about the chimps here in Scotland in the zoo, and being able to talk to them and let them know about the work that we are helping the field station carry out in Uganda. So how do we do that at the zoo? Of course, we've got our amazing group of chimps that you can come and see in the enclosure. But we've also got lots of good interpretation in the enclosure. There's lots of interactive activities that go on. We've got lots of space for kids to do animal experiences, such as they're doing with the reptiles down there. And we can also do lots of excellent husbandry. As you can see, one of our keepers doing up there in the top right, doing some training with the chimps that people can see as well. But we're also part of the breeding program, which is ultimately in the top middle there is what we wanted the results to be, is more infants and babies born to our group. So yeah, the enclosure itself, the Budongo Trail, it's a pretty amazing project that was completed in 2008. If some of you remember our old chimp enclosure, which I worked in back in the early 2000s, it was very functional, but it really got to a stage where we needed to move things forward with how we looked after the chimp group at the zoo. So this very ambitious project was undertaken to build a new enclosure for them. And it was and still is quite state of the art. It was one of the most ambitious projects that the zoo's undertaken so far. It's a cost of 5.5 million. And it was all about providing an enclosure for the animals to be able to exhibit all their natural behaviors, to behave like chimps, and to really give them choice and control over their environment, which is what is really important for animals in zoos. So these are some parts of the enclosure that you might not see, or this is a different perspective of what you might see. We've got 3 pods that the chimps can use in the indoor enclosure, but we also have a large off-show area. We have what we call our bed area, and there's lots of things we can do there with the chimps. We can do training with them. We do lots of husbandry training through positive reinforcement, and that helps us to look after them. They can present things, body parts. We can have a look at their teeth. We can take temperatures and things like that. And we've also got a space where we can carry out veterinary procedures. And this means that we don't need to take an animal up to our hospital area. Everything is done in the building, and it makes everything a lot easier for the staff and the chimps whenever we have to do routine or emergency treatment. And the pods themselves are very specifically designed, obviously, for the chimps. They've got lots of vertical space. Chimps, being quite arboreal animals, need that space in their enclosure. So yeah, it's a really well designed but in great area for our chimps to live in. And so yeah, onto some chimp behaviour. We say we want our chimps to be chimps and to behave like chimps. We've got a group of 17 animals at the zoo at the moment, and one of the main behaviours that you might see, it's very sporadic, but it happens quite a lot, is aggression in chimps. There is a bit of the media have always presented chimps in the past as being, quite cheeky and funny and cute, but male chimps especially are really quite aggressive animals. They're very, very competitive in their position in the group. So fights do break out, they have squabbles. A lot of it is all about noise and show. Very rarely actually descends into physical violence against each other. A lot of it is just vocalization, and they will kind of intimidate each other. Nobody really actually wants to get into a fight. But this is David, one of our older chimps, chasing one of the females who might have done something to upset him. And yeah, this is quite common to be seen in a group of chimps. Chimps also display begging behaviour, and this is basically if one chimp's got something that another chimp wants, they will beg for it, and it's not necessarily a hands out, prostrate on the floor, asking for something. They'll very subtly sidle up and maybe stick their face right in the other chimp's face. They generally do this over foods. You may have seen videos of chimps in zoos which do very obvious begging behaviours, like hands stretched out or clapping behaviours. These are kind of learned behaviours that these chimps might have got, and people will throw things to them. This natural begging behaviour is always done chimp to chimp, and it doesn't generally work, but it can work to their advantage if they do it to their friends or someone they get on well with, and they might get a little bit of food out of it if they haven't managed to forage enough for themselves. Display behaviour is a really important behaviour amongst males. We have Paul here on the left, sorry, displaying towards another male. We've got Kindia, who is no longer with us, but he was a big fan of displaying on the right there. And you can see this is all about making themselves look intimidating. Chimps don't often move about on their just on their legs, but they will quite often do that when they're displaying. And it's basically all about posturing, making themselves look as big and scary as possible. All their hair will puff out and stand erect. And yeah, it's really about scaring and intimidation. And they will incorporate other things into their displays as well. Liberius, one of our dominant males, will jump off from a height, which is really quite intimidating because he's absolutely huge. Kathse will grab things and just throw them in the air. And Kindia was a master at intimidating not only the other chimps, but a lot of our visitors when he'd run up and down the tunnels, making an absolute racket. And you know, it could frighten some of the visitors sometimes. And that behaviour is seen out in the wild as well. Chimps will drum on the buttresses of trees. And yeah, as I say, it's all about being intimidating and making lots and lots of noise. So this is a fear grin. And this is a really important one that we talk to visitors quite a lot. At first glance, you may think that this chimp here, this is Paul, one of our males, is happy. And this is a picture that you might quite often see on you know, a chimp on a greetings card or something like this. But this is actually a fear grin. Us humans are the only animals actually grin and smile to express happiness. And chimps will do this when they're trying to be submissive to an animal, another chimp that's being aggressive or displaying at them. And it's their way of saying, you know, please don't hurt me, leave me alone. And we try and educate people about this because it actually gives a bad impression when they see chimps doing this in the media and on greetings cards and things like that. And research has actually shown that it's detrimental to these animals' welfare and conservation efforts. When they see animals in those situations, people tend to think that they are less likely to be endangered and less likely to need help. So this is a really important chimp expression not to mistake. And yeah, so we've talked about aggression and displaying, but that can break out into fighting. Males, it tends to just be between males, although if you've got a very dominant or high-ranking female, they will quite often stick up for themselves and fight back against the males. This happens fairly rarely. As you can see here, this is Kathse, our alpha male. I'm not sure who he's actually fighting. Most of the time, they don't actually stand up to him and engage him in a fight. But when they do, you can see it's very impressive. Chimps are very muscular animals. They're very strong. And you can see by Kathse's open mouth there, that's a very aggressive facial expression. And he's probably getting prepared to bite them somewhere that's really going to hurt. Chimps have these huge canines that they don't really need for feeding. They're generally there for helping them out in a fight as weapons. But we have been talking about lots of kind of the violent and aggressive side of chimps, but they are very social animals. You wouldn't be able to live in big groups if they just had fights all the time and were aggressive to each other. And grooming is one of the behaviours that chimps do to help establish bonds within their group. It's not looking for fleas or lice or anything like that. It is all about, it's a really social behaviour. On the left here, we've got Breck and Edith grooming each other. It's a really good way for a male to kind of curry favour with a female if they get groomed a lot. They're going to be in the good books and they might preferentially mate with them. Over on the right there, we have Kathse on the right-hand side and Liberius on the left. There are two most high-ranking males, and they will quite often sit and groom each other. And it helps to maintain a relationship between them, and it helps to diffuse any potential aggression. There is always a bit of tension between the two of them because they are always vying for that top spot, but they've lived together their whole lives, so by keeping that bond established through grooming, it helps to decrease the tension within the group. And this is a bit of reassurance behaviour as well. Quite often, if there has been a fight, before you see any grooming start, there'll be lots of reassurance behaviour. This is on the left-hand side here. This is Eva backing onto, I think this is Sophie, and they'll quite often do this. They put themselves in a vulnerable position. They'll expose their bottom to someone, and almost 99 times out of 100, the chimp they're doing it to will respond with a big hug from behind. Or often they'll hold their hand out to each other, and this is again exposing a kind of vulnerable part of their body to another chimp. Another chimp will generally grab that hand and stick it in their mouth and accompany it with lots of vocalization. And it's a bit of a kind of a trust exercise as well. But it's a good way of relieving tension, and they can get back to grooming each other and building those bonds again. So one of the questions we often get asked is, why do we have chimps in zoos? And it's for a plethora of reasons, but one of the reasons is we are really wanting to safeguard for the future. Next slide, please. Yes. So there's what we call a IAZA ex situ program for chimps, as there are with lots of animals in the zoo, and it's a breeding program that's coordinated by a whole group of people. And the reason is because chimpanzee populations are in decline across the range in Africa, and especially the subspecies, the Western chimps, is seen an 80% decline in the last 25 years, and unfortunately the rate of that decline has increased over the past few years. Western chimps are in the top 25 most endangered primates in the world. So chimps, all four subspecies are facing real problems out there. So there's all the conservation efforts that go on, like the conservation work going out in Uganda, the BCFS. But the zoos throughout the world, and especially in Europe, are part of this breeding program, which we want to ensure that there's a genetically healthy captive population. So if need be, in the future, we could start thinking, we see this population as basically an insurance population, and if need be, you could start to look at reintroduction. But they're not only there as an insurance population, but they help to raise awareness and contribute towards research and conservation education, and be the conduit through which people will learn about how to help conserve chimps out in the wild. And there's over 1,000 individuals within the breeding program in 130 zoos and across 31 countries across Europe. So it is really a great example of the collaboration work that happens between zoos. So we've got a great team of keepers at Budongo Trail, and a day in the life of a keeper can't really be summarised here because no day is generally the same. But a lot of our day is taken up with cleaning and feeding, and that's the kind of, I suppose, image that a lot of people have of zookeepers. But there is a lot more that goes on in a day of a keeper. We have lots of roles. We are chefs, nutritionists. We have to prepare the right diet and present it in the right way. We're gardeners and builders, not just cleaners. We have to help maintain the enclosure and make sure everything's working right. We provide the chimps with lots of enrichment. Environmental enrichment is something that we can provide for our animals, and that helps them express their natural repertoire behaviours. And although it can look unnatural, like these ice cream tub lids with some peanut butter smeared on them, it can help them to emulate the natural behaviours. And it's not only very important to conserve the animals themselves and the genetics, really important to conserve behaviours as well. And this is helped by doing things like environmental enrichments. We're nurses, we provide medication, and we're kind of teachers as well. We have to build this really good bond with our chimps, through training. And also it's about engaging with our visitors as well, and kind of getting that spark in our visitors they obviously care about the chimps when they come and see them, because they're very engaged with what they see, but it's getting that link to the conservation work that is getting done and needs to be done out in the wild. And we're also almost partly researchers as well. The team works very closely with the team of researchers that work at the zoo. We help to facilitate the researchers, and we work really closely with them. And that leads on to our next speaker, who is Kate Crowns.
Hi everyone, thank you very much, Donald. So thank you again for joining this event to learn about our work. My name's Kate Grounds. I'm the research coordinator for the Budongo Research Unit. So I'm just going to give you a bit of an overview today and show you some of the research work that takes place at Edinburgh Zoo with the chimpanzees. So what is the Budongo Research Unit? Well, it's a purpose-built chimpanzee research centre run by the University of St Andrews in partnership with Edinburgh Zoo. It's led by world-renowned comparative psychologist, Professor Josep Cole. He's based at the University of St Andrews, and his scientific work is well known throughout his field. So comparative psychologists, they study other animals to look at the similarities and differences between the animals and between humans, ultimately to help answer questions on how our own human behaviour and cognition has evolved. So I'll explain the term cognition a little bit later, but as our closest living relative, the main aim of the Budongo Research Unit is to advance our scientific knowledge on chimpanzee behaviour and cognition. So the brew itself supports lots and lots of students and researchers from across the world, but particularly, of course, from the University of St Andrews and from the Scottish Primate Research Group. Now, the Scottish Primate Research Group, it was founded in 1987 by 3 universities, St Andrews, Edinburgh and Stirling. And then it's expanded over the years to include other universities such as Aberdeen, Heriot-Watt, Abertay, and associates as well from the University of York or University of Durham. So it's a huge, massive research collaborative group. And it actually makes Scotland one of the leading countries in the world, which many people don't realise, to come to if you're interested in studying primates, whether that's their welfare, their behaviour, their ecology or their cognition. So it's a really important, the Budongo Research Unit is a really important facility for the Scottish Primate Research Group. So it was built in 2017, obviously a really big project, and research activities began in early 2018. So we've been going on for about 2.5 years if you take into account the COVID disruption. So the Budongo Research Unit is on the ground floor of the Budongo Trail building as you enter, and it joins on to the chimpanzees' fantastic main enclosure that Donald's just been mentioning. So the chimpanzees can come from the outside and they can travel through the pods or through the underground, there's like an underground tunnel system, and there's multiple access points into the brew itself. So the brew research rooms have been specially designed for doing research with the chimpanzees. So these are research windows you can see in front of you. And they're specially designed to be extra strong, as obviously the chimpanzees, like Donald was saying, are extremely strong, and they do a lot of display, and they're famous for their displays. So they'll, kick off the research panels or the doors. So we have to make sure that everything is quite bespoke for the chimpanzees. So the researchers will set themselves up ready for research, and then every day between 9 and 1, we open the doors, and the chimpanzees will come running in and take part in research. Now, it's completely voluntary, so they can come and go as they please in the research room, but we give them the incentive to take part in research by giving them their favourite juice or fruit as a reward within the experiments themselves. So more often than not, they're extremely excited to come in and take part in research. So I want to just show you a brief video clip. We're hoping this works and that you'll all be able to see and hear it. And basically this is just the chimps coming in on a typical day. So I'll just play it and let you hopefully hear and see. So we sound a horn for them so that they know that we're open, although they're usually waiting, like on this example. And that was Valou who ran in first. And then we have Eva, Paul, Kafsi and Liberius all coming in. And that's the typical display and behavior. You can see them kicking, that's Liberius kicking off the door there. So they're really excited. Hopefully you could hear that, but they're really excited when they do come in. So one of our core reasons for partnership and for the partnership with Edinburgh Zoo is obviously the opportunity to engage the public with scientific research as well. If you're familiar with the zoo, you might know the Living Links Research Centre, which is a monkey research centre further up the hill at the zoo, also run by the University of St Andrews. And that was specifically designed to allow the visitors coming to the zoo to be able to watch the research with monkeys in the cubicles. And so when Josette was designing the brew alongside the zoo, they really wanted to mirror this and have the same opportunity for people coming into the Budongo Trail. So you can see these massive windows we've got, and you can actually up close and personal watch the chimpanzees take part in research. So it's really fantastic for visitors to see. People just find it amazing when you see a chimp using a touchscreen or a puzzle box. And it's also great because sometimes people misunderstand the term research and they might think you're forcing animals to do something, but actually all our research is completely voluntary, it's non-invasive, and the chimps come and go as they please, and it's just up to them whether they take part or not. We actually have some chimps. We've got Leanne, who is a female, and she has never foot set in the brew yet in the 3 years we've been running. And then we have Helene, who is Valou and Miss Cindy's mum. And she loves the brew. She comes in all the time, always playing in there, but she's just not interested in the research. And then on the other hand, you have chimps like Valou, her son, or Kalimi or Liberius. They all love taking part. So there's a real mix, and it's just up to the chimps, and our researchers have to be patient and see who wants to take part. So I mentioned the term cognition earlier, and this is a big part of psychology and what our researchers study. So cognition is the study of the mind and its mental processes. And so our researchers are interested in how the chimpanzee mind really works and what capabilities they have in comparison to humans. So many of our researchers actually run these experiments, not just with the chimps in the Budongo Research Unit, but also maybe at Living Links with the monkeys, with capuchin monkeys or squirrel monkeys, and also with humans. So often with visitors who come to the zoo, we'll run some of the experiments with them, or they visit nurseries and they'll run some of the experiments with children. So that's that really comparative side of what our researchers do. So listed on the left, just as a few areas that our researchers explore, from long-term memory to whether the chimps can make a plan when they're using, say, a puzzle box, will they coordinate with each other or with a researcher to complete a task? And do they communicate, again, with each other or with us when they're involved in different tasks? So these areas can be quite challenging for researchers to study, and they've got to very carefully plan experiments that can try and answer questions in these kind of areas. So we can kind of divide how they do the research into three categories. We've got physical research, eye tracking research, and touchscreen research. So I'm just going to give you a bit of an idea of what each one involves. So physical research, obviously, as it suggests, anything physical that the chimpanzees can touch or manipulate, or that the researcher is having to manipulate for them. So this could be simply a set of cups that they have to follow a reward that's under a cup and hidden and moves around. It could be a puzzle box like the top middle photo that you can see there. That's got an ice cube at the top and it has various levels, and the chimpanzee's got to get the ice cube from the top level to the bottom. And the left side might be harder than the right side, and we look at whether the chimpanzees can plan ahead for how much effort it's going to take them. I'm also going to give you a bit more detail on a specific study in the top right corner. That's a seesaw. Now, this has been designed specifically to study a coordination task. I'm going to show you a video in a moment, but I'll just explain a little bit more before the video plays. So if you move on to the next slide, ready for the video, Jess? Thank you very much. So you can see here the seesaw, and there's a little grape on the bottom. And basically, Elizabeth, the researcher, was interested in whether the chimpanzees understand her part in this task. So in order for the chimpanzee to get the grape, the seesaw needs to tip. So half of the chimps learned that Elizabeth tips the seesaw. So she actually makes it tip and they see her do that. The grape rolls down, and then the chimp, their action is to pull a piece of paper and receive this grape. So half the chimps saw Elizabeth do it, and then the other half saw a lever. You can just see the lever in the background there. The lever would sort of magically fall onto the seesaw and tip it for the chimp. So they are not associating the tip-in with Elizabeth. So she's looking at the difference between these two groups and whether the chimpanzees will maybe communicate more with her if they expect her to tip the seesaw compared to the group that don't. And also how quickly can they learn when they're given access to the seesaw to actually tip it themselves. So we'll show you an example of this with Valou. Hopefully, again, this video will work for you. So he sees very quickly, he's got to move round, tips the seesaw, grape rolls down. Now he's got to go back round again and pull the grape off with a piece of paper. And he was in the lever condition, so he was not expecting Elizabeth to do anything. So that's just a great example of the kind of cool apparatus that researchers have to design in order to look at questions like coordination. So moving on to eye tracking. Now, eye tracking is a fantastic technology. It's been used a lot with humans, and it's now expanding to be used with other animals, macaques, dogs, and we use it with chimpanzees. So the eye tracking uses a special laser technology and the reflection in the corner of your eye to track where a subject is actually looking on the screen. So we use this method with the chimpanzees, and you basically just need a monitor, some images that you're interested in showing them, the eye tracker, and a chimp staying still. And obviously a chimp staying still is not very easy. So what we actually have is this juice tube. So that's what you can see in the images here in the middle and on the left. It's a juice nozzle, basically a straw that the chimps can suck juice through as they're watching images on a screen. So it's kind of up to them. They're just drinking the juice because they love juice. And then if they're interested to watch what's on the screen, they can do this. So Freck is showing the perfect position on the left image there. That's him lined up. Valou in the top of the image, unfortunately, quite often seems to enjoy drinking juice upside down or on his side for some reason. So we have to be very patient, wait for him to get into position. And then Cassie is displaying one of his amazing faces that he uses when he's sucking juice, when he's got his lips straight squished up against the polycarbonate panel. So it's often quite fun watching them when they're doing the research. So just to show you what the eye tracking is like, again, hopefully this video will work. I'm sorry if it's not, but we will have the recording that people can watch after. So you see the juice on the left, and that goes down to where Freck is watching the monitor, and the eye tracker's positioned just underneath. And then so that's capturing the eyes and when they're looking. And the chimp just has to stay still, either drinking the juice as Freck's doing, or sometimes they don't even drink juice because they're just quite fascinated with what's on the screen, like Valou here. And so once they're in position, we can press play. And this is just an example experiment to show you the red dots and the lines are where the chimpanzee is actually looking. So this is a study comparing two different photos. Some of these chimps are old group members and some are stranger chimps. And the researcher was looking at whether they had a long-term memory for chimpanzees that used to be in their group. So it's a really flexible research and can answer very many questions, and you can show them any kind of images or videos to answer those questions. So moving on from eye tracking research to touchscreen research. So again, technology, JSIP is a big fan of using technology for research, and there's so much more that you can now do with technology for research. So touchscreens use infrared technology to know where a chimpanzee is pressing on the screen. So we've got a special touchscreen panel that slides into those research windows, and then the chimpanzee can interact with it as they want. So it's not as easy as something like eye tracking, where it's measuring a natural reaction that the chimps have. They're just naturally watching something on a screen. With touchscreen, you have to put a lot of effort to train the chimpanzees to actually use the touchscreen and the games that are involved. So on the left there, you have Freck, and he is using this amazing virtual environment. So it's basically like a computer game. And inside the computer game, he can touch the screen and move around. And I will show you a video in a second to demonstrate that. And he can explore it and find fruit and look at, basically find hidden fruit. And when he finds an apple, he gets an apple. So the researchers, once they're trained, the researchers can run experiments to explore, how quickly can they find some hidden fruit based on the environment they're in? Do they use trees or rocks to help navigate their way to a hidden fruit source? And do they get better at that over time? Will their route become more direct once they learn where the fruit source is, and then learn, using the environment around them, how they can get there fastest? So again, this is kind of questions that are quite difficult to study in the wild, but in this unique fashion, you can study things like navigation in chimps with a computer game. And another example, Valou on the bottom middle picture, he's doing a serial ordering task. And basically he's learning that certain pictures have to be touched in an order for him to get a reward. Now, ordering is something that humans do in everyday life. It's very natural, whether you're cooking a meal and you're following a recipe in order, doing your shopping in order, doing any kind of task that requires ordering. So researchers are interested in, can chimpanzees do this? And yes, they can. And in fact, some of you might have heard of a famous chimp called Ayumu, who can order numbers, and he can, on a touch screen, touch 1, 2, 3, 4 orders in a row and numbers in a row. And he can even go as far as, we're using his memory to, if the numbers are basically blanked out on the screen, he sees them really briefly, then they're covered, he can still remember where the numbers are and touch them in the right order. So he does this amazingly, and I don't think there's pretty much any human that can beat him at it. And Valou, okay, he's at very early stages, but this is what, the same kind of task, basically. This is where they can get to if they're trained to do certain tasks like this. So sorry, I blabbed on about that for quite a while, but you can move on to the video. And this is just to show you the different tasks that I just mentioned. So Valou first with the serial ordering. So he has to touch them in the right order. He hesitates, and those hesitations are really important as well for the researchers when they're studying this. They can get a lot of data from hesitations and how quickly they touch a photo. So you get that one wrong. So we had that, the red screen, but then get straight back into it. And then this is Freck with the virtual reality program. So you can see he's moving around. If he touches the right, he turns to the right. He sees a peanut, touches it, and then he gets a peanut down a feeding tube. And you can see in the background the trees, the pond, the fruit around. So that's him exploring. And now he's at that stage where he's doing the more difficult experiments. So yeah, a really, really fantastic research area that our research is exploring. Oh, sorry, I've just lost my place. So far, what have we done? Well, we've had clocked up 4,000 research hours in the brew so far, and that's supported 28 researchers, and that's a mix of undergraduates, master students, and then a longer term PhD students or postdocs. And between them, they've conducted an amazing 40 research projects, which is a fantastic feat because these projects, they take months to complete with the chimpanzees, and you have to have a lot of patience and time. So these kind of studies, we've been doing, I guess, about 2.5 years, I think I said earlier, and that's because of COVID, we've had to stop, but it's an amazing amount. And I started working out just thinking of grapes and apples and how much fruit we've made might have given them. And I was quite amazed to see that we've clocked up about 18,000 grapes through this time. So that's over 142 weeks of research. And that's what we actually track, what the chimpanzees are eating. And that's just to make sure from a welfare and health point of view that we're not overfeeding them with sugary fruit, to make sure that their health is always good. So we've got so much more to come. We've had obviously a lot of initial training in the first couple of years, but the chimps are really becoming research experts now with the number of different studies that they've taken part in. Now, none of this would be possible without the collaboration that we have with the keeper team. So as Donald mentioned, we work really closely together on the research activities. There's always a researcher present in every session. And this is to keep both the chimps and the researchers safe. So obviously most of our students, they have never worked with chimpanzees or primates before. And so we really rely on the keeper's experience and knowledge to guide the researchers to conduct safe and rewarding research for the chimps. So they help train the researchers in their IDs and how to interact with the chimps safely. And they use their husbandry experience to help distract the chimps, because we're testing in the social environment, and they can come up and down to the research whenever they want. So the keeper will help distract them and move them so that it all take turns. So it's a huge benefit for all of us to be working so closely together. And it's really lovely actually to see these pre-COVID time pictures of when we used to have lots of cake and coffee sessions, which are our other shared passion besides chimps, and have presentations where we can learn from each other in both ways. So the keepers hear more about the research projects that have taken place, and the researchers can get feedback for future experiments as to what they might be able to do with the chimpanzees. And our researchers also help the keepers with their DIMSA course, which is an actual zookeeping course that they do when they run their own project. So there's a lot of back and forth and shared knowledge between our teams, which is really fantastic. And this can actually lead on as well to actual scientific collaborations on publications. So I just wanted to quickly highlight one of the studies which a PhD student called Emma McEwen has done. So she was interested to explore how whether basically a chimp could pass a tool back and forth to a partner, and whether they would understand the partner's action in this actual experiment. So if they needed to hand the tool, where's the partner's hand? So for example, in the image, you can see if they had their hand on the left or the right or the middle, will the chimp follow that and pass to the correct location? then if the hand is occupied, say by a radio, will they understand that and know that the partner can't grab that tool? Or say a barrier might be blocking that hand. So these were the different conditions she was looking at. But obviously from a safety point of view, handing sticks back and forth, but also from the point of view of the relationship that the keepers already have with the chimpanzees, it's already established in their husbandry that they do with them. And so it just made sense to collaborate on this and have the keepers actually run the experiment for Emma. So we had 3 keepers, Sophia, Callum and Amanda, and they all helped to run this experiment with Emma. And it's actually just been submitted, so excitingly we'll have that hopefully published soon. And we're really hoping that we'll have more of these collaborations going forward in the future as well. So I hope that gives you a really good overview of the Budongo Research Unit, very quick, and how our researchers actually study the chimps. We're really grateful, obviously, this amazing collaboration we've got with Edinburgh Zoo and the opportunity to answer questions about chimpanzee cognition that is just not possible to actually study in the wild. So the Brew offers a really unique opportunity to better understand the chimpanzee mind. So we'll see how things go, and we're excited for the future partnership and carrying on to show zoo visitors how fascinating and intelligent the Budongo chimpanzees are. Because of course, the more people see how amazing chimps are, the more easy it is to generate help and interest to protect them in the wild. So on that note, I'm going to hand you over to Helen, and we're going to go from the Budongo Trail to the Budongo Forest in Uganda. Thank you.
Thanks, Kate. It's really great to be able to speak to you all and take you all to the wild now. So my name's Helen Sen. I'm Head of Conservation and Science at the Royal Zoological Society of Scotland. And it's my job to help oversee all of the conservation projects that we do with wild species, so supporting species in the wild. And that could be species in Scotland like the wildcat and the pine hoverfly and the beaver, or species around the world, including the Budongo Conservation Field Station in Uganda. And really, what RZSS's role in this is we are conservation practitioners ourselves. So we've been partnering with BCFS for a number of years to provide help and advice, but also really critically, your visit to the Budongo Trail at Edinburgh Zoo is helping to really support lots of conservation work on the ground. And by supporting the field projects on chimpanzees, really critically, actually protecting a really large wild habitat as well. So this is where the Budongo Conservation Field Station is in Uganda. It's near the Alberton Rift. And the Budongo Forest Reserve is one of the largest tracts of forest in East Africa. And it's home to around 700 to 800 chimpanzees, and the population numbers are actually stable or increasing. And the forest has been monitored for a whole variety of reasons going back to the earliest 20th century. But just to put those numbers in a little bit of context, so chimpanzees are endangered globally. They're listed as endangered on the IUCN Red List. And the numbers are perhaps about 500,000, 500,000, or maybe less than that, maybe even only half than that. And that, to put it into context, that's about the population of Edinburgh. So if we take the upper estimate of 500,000, that's around the same number of people that live in Edinburgh. Now, the number of chimpanzees in Uganda, we're looking at around 5,000. So that's the number of people that live in Corstorphine, where Edinburgh Zoo is situated. But those animals, those 5,000 animals are spread across the whole of Uganda. Uganda's the size of the United Kingdom. And that 500,000 number of chimps is spread across the whole of Africa. So it sounds like quite a lot, but it's really not many animals when you consider the large areas that we're looking at. And the threats that these populations are facing in the wild are habitat loss primarily through deforestation, also hunting, both deliberate hunting, but also accidental hunting because of other poaching and snaring activities. And gradually these populations are becoming more and more fragmented as they become smaller and as the habitat patches become smaller. And so that's really one of the challenges that's facing chimpanzees in the wild, is this increasing shrinking back of populations, becoming more and more fragmented, and obviously becoming in much closer contact than with human populations that are growing, and needing to depend potentially on the resources in the forests where the chimpanzees are living. And so there's some really real challenges facing this species, and it's great to be able to use our support and work at Edinburgh Zoo to really try and focus on improving the fate of this species in the wild. So we've been working with the Budongo Conservation Field Station since 2005. It was actually set up in 1990, and really has grown from strength to strength since then. And I think it's fair to say that it's a really internationally renowned centre for research and conservation in Uganda, and a really great example of how focusing on protecting a species like chimpanzees also has all sorts of additional benefits, both to the habitat that the species live in, but also actually in terms of the people and the populations that live in contact with that habitat. So we start the research in the Budongo forest in Uganda, really the research and conservation work really started with thinking about some of the things that Kate and Donald have been talking about in their talks about the chimpanzees in Edinburgh Zoo. So people have been fascinated for a long time with primate behaviour, particularly chimpanzee behaviour, because chimpanzees are one of our closest living relatives, and we can learn a lot about human psychology and human behaviour from understanding chimps in the wild and in captivity. And you've probably noticed that Kate and Donald know the personalities of the individual chimps really well. They can really read the chimpanzee's behaviour. And the chimpanzees in the Budongo forest, 3 communities, have been studied for a long time in really almost minute detail. So every single thing about the family structure and the populations and the daily behaviour of these animals is known and followed and monitored by a team of research assistants and scientists from a wide range of different universities who are studying human behaviour, primate behaviour, and wanting to understand more about really ultimately as well human behaviour and how we behave, things like dominance, hierarchy, and a whole variety of other things. And so going out in the Budongo forest with the rangers is fascinating, because these chimpanzee troops are habituated to human presence. You can stand really close to them and they behave and completely ignore the human scientists that are looking and really tracking their natural behaviour. And so that's how the Budongo Field Station started. But of course, it's not possible to study these chimpanzees without considering all the threats that they're facing. And as I've described, the chimpanzees are facing habitat loss. They're facing snaring as well. And so really from that work then grew a much bigger kind of desire to conserve these populations and the forests that they're living in. And this is something that RZSS particularly has been supporting BCFS with since 2005. Next slide, please, Jess. So probably the work of BCFS now focuses on 4 main areas that I'll go through. So the first of these is the chimpanzees themselves. Next slide, please, Jess. And that's looking not only at the chimpanzee behaviour and the research that goes on, but then also thinking about the chimp populations in other ways. So the chimpanzees are often affected by various health problems and disease outbreaks. Some of these might actually be diseases that are transmitted from humans. So human and chimp diseases are often very similar, and there's definitely a risk that humans can be passing diseases onto chimps. And the researchers that go into the forest take a lot of precautions around potentially transferring human diseases to chimps. People go into a period of quarantine before they go into the forest, and they also stand there's always social distancing, even pre-COVID times, and of course now that's so much more important. So there's the team have been doing a lot of work on monitoring chimp health, but also one of the really obvious impacts on chimp health is the snaring that happens in the forest. So there are many people that are setting snares in the forest, not necessarily, it has to be said, targeting chimpanzees, but targeting small gazelles and duikers in order to supplement their diet. And the chimpanzees often get caught in these snares, and this causes really horrific injuries, sometimes losing a limb. And the veterinarians at the Budongo Conservation Field Station often have to intervene with trying to help chimps that are caught in snares. But there's also anti-snaring team that patrol the forest constantly and remove the snares so that there's less of a threat to chimps. And these snares are really hard to see. You can probably see in the background there's a lot of undergrowth. The people that set these snares are very expert in making them very difficult to see. And the rangers are extremely skilled and experienced at really tracking down the traces of humans, the tracks of humans in the forest, and locating these snares and then removing them. And at the moment, on a monthly basis, around 400 to 500 snares are being removed from the forest and the area around this research centre. So it's a considerable threat to the chimps. Next slide, please, Jess. One of the other things that's been happening alongside the long-term monitoring of the chimpanzees is actually monitoring a whole variety of other things to do with the forest. So there's been a big study on timing of flowering and fruiting of trees, phenology of trees over many years. And that's been very important at trying to understand things like, potentially things like the impact of climate change and just the health of the forest. We've also helped to set up a long-term monitoring program on amphibians in the forest, and there are long-term monitoring programs on birds and a whole variety of other species, because this is an extremely rich ecosystem. And so the infrastructure of researchers already being there has really helped to facilitate learning everything about this ecosystem, which of course the chimpanzees depend on as well. Next slide, please, Jess. And then another really important aspect of the research is working on alternative livelihoods. So the communities of people that live around the forest edge, many of them live in extreme poverty, and it's very, very hard to make a living, to feed their families. So extreme poverty, the definition of extreme poverty is living on less than $1 a day. And so many of the farmers around the forest edge are coming into conflict with chimpanzees or baboons because they're raiding their crops, and that's very seriously impacting on their livelihoods. And some people are also going out into the forest to set snares and to supplement their diet. And so BCFS, the team at BCFS, received a Darwin grant a number of years ago to work on this and to work closely with the communities on trying to come up with some alternative livelihood strategies, things like providing households with goats to breed as a source of protein, providing healthcare for domestic animals, providing people around the forest edge with opportunities to take part in being patrolmen to search for snares as opposed to setting them, and also giving people agricultural advice on perhaps crops that they can plant like rice that don't require constant guarding and investment of time and resource, and so reduce that level of conflict with the primates. And this has been a really amazing program, and one that is delivered very, very effectively by the Ugandan team, who have a really deep understanding of the challenges that the people that they are living with face in this environment. So hopefully that's given you just a little bit of an overview of how chimpanzees in zoos are twinned with chimpanzees in the wild, and that they're both kind of being studied and understood intensively, but how that benefit actually is then spilling over into is providing a much wider umbrella effect to a whole range of other activities that are happening within the largest tract of rainforest in Uganda, and really providing some degree of protection to all the many species that are living in that habitat. And so just finally, you know, do come and visit us at the Budongo Trail, come and see the chimps, and come and see the interp that we have as well. We've got a big picture up of the Budongo Conservation Field Station, and know that your visit to the zoo is helping to fund all of this amazing research on our closest living relative, and is also helping to protect the populations of this endangered species in the wild. Thanks.
Thank you so much to all our speakers. Thank you. We've got a few minutes now for question and answers. So we haven't had any sent in yet. We've had a few submitted earlier, but if you do have any questions, you should see a Q&A box either at the bottom of your screen or on your Zoom toolbar, and do feel free to send any in. Helen, I think this first one probably starts with you, but you may want to pass on to Donald at some point. But we just had someone ask, is this sort of partnership quite common within zoos, especially like within Bioza zoos, or is this a bit of a novel and unique partnership, especially one that was established 16 plus years ago?
I think, I mean, many zoos support conservation work and through the species that they hold in captivity, and provide donations to conservation projects. The partnership that we have with Budongo Conservation Field Station in Uganda has been running for a long time, and I think in that sense it's quite a special partnership, and a really good example of just how much can be achieved through really bringing people close to the species that we have at the zoo, and using those funds to then support conservation in the wild.
Yeah, that sounds great. And I mean, I know particularly I can, in terms of my role as kind of an engagement, from an engagement point of view, kind of within RZSS, like it's fantastic to be able to make those links, to be actually able to show people, like when they visit, these are the broad reaching impacts of their support. So no, exactly. Donald, we had a question for you as well. In terms of kind of day-to-day management, I think it was more about, wow, it sounds like you've got the best job in the world, and just sort of how on a day-to-day your tasks kind of match up with, you were talking about contributing to the breeding program kind of within the lifespan of an individual. Like, how do those tasks on such a kind of small day-by-day measure, how do you kind of keep in perspective that you're having such wide-ranging impacts, like from that individual perspective to species level conservation? Like, do you feel like you have the best job in the world, or is there just a lot of chimp poop in the meantime?
I mostly feel like I have the best job in the world. Sometimes I feel like I've got the worst job in the world, depending on what happens in the day. But working with chimps day to day, quite often you don't have that much time to think about it, you know, the wide-ranging impacts of what you're doing. But when when me and the team talk about it, or we have a bit of time to think about it, yeah, it just kind of motivates us more to to do the best at our job, and to let people, as many people, know about chimps as we can. It's very hard to get one of our Budongo and living links keepers to actually stop talking about chimps or monkeys. We're always, sharing things on Facebook. It can be a funny video, or it can be, some, thing that's majorly impacting on the population of chimps out in the wild. So, yeah, we're very busy people in what we do, but we are very motivated, and it's all down to our kind of fascination with chimps, and we want to kind of inspire that fascination and engagement with our animals with as many people as possible.
Yeah, it certainly looks like an amazing job when I stop by, especially with little Miss Cindy there at the moment. I know she's growing rapidly, but she's just the cutest, smallest thing in there at the moment. And Kate, we had a question sent in for you as well. I think people were fascinated really to see kind of how a zoo was contributing and actually playing such a kind of core role within the research that you've just described to us, and in terms of your role kind of within being that connector between the world of academia and universities, and within the zoo and the logistics, and working with keepers and chimps and research students. For you, how does that bigger picture kind of like pan out? Was this a job that you knew existed, or in terms of what your day-to-day looks like? Is it pure academia, or is it something that you can kind of stop and think, wow, I'm surrounded by chimps and actually playing a part in this bigger conversation?
Well, interestingly, I didn't know this kind of job existed. Oh, sorry if there's feedback on my headphones. And actually, for people who are not necessarily interested in going down a direct academic route, this kind of role, you can be involved in research and involved in zoos, but not actually be an academic yourself. So I'm not an academic and I haven't done a PhD, but I've come into this from more of a project management side. And what I do love about the role is I am interacting with all sorts of people. So I'm obviously working with animals, of course, is top of the role. I mean, it's amazing to be working so closely with chimpanzees, but I collaborate with everyone, all the different parts of the zoo and the different universities that work at the zoo. So I think in these kind of roles, it's such a unique opportunity to have research in a big zoo like this in Edinburgh Zoo, and to have so much research because we have the Budongo Research Unit and the Living Links, and we've got the ties between those two research units, but also then with all the researchers across Scotland who do complementary studies either at the zoo or at other zoos or in the wild. So I think the role is just fascinating because I get to work with all the different areas of the zoo, the keepers, interpretation team, education, but then also with all these separate universities across Scotland and the researchers that are coming from there to study. And I think, again, just to note for anyone, if there's anyone on the call who is interested in studying primates, a lot of people don't realise that Scotland is one of the best places to come and study in it. It's because we've got this fantastic partnerships with places like Edinburgh Zoo where we can study research in such amazing detail.
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to stop sharing just now. The screen. We haven't had any questions sent in yet, but if anyone does have any questions, you can get in touch with probably the zoo or RZSS is your best first bet, and we're active on social media, on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, on @RZSS or @Edinburgh Zoo. We also, though, on Twitter have an @Budongo Trail account where Donald's team, the keepers, post kind of behind the scenes updates. So it's always great to get a view of what they've been working on throughout the day. And the Budongo Conservation Field Station, they're active on Twitter as well with @Budongo Chimps. So do give all those accounts a follow so you can stay up to date. But it's been absolutely wonderful having you here this evening. Thank you very much for joining. I did see a message throughout in the middle of the event saying a few people had trouble joining. So this event will be available as a recording. So if you're watching it on that, thank you very much for your patience. But if you're in the audience and you know someone who was struggling to get on, I'll make sure the link is available. I'll post that on our social channels just now. So do please forward that on. And if you're interested in these kind of events, we have a few more throughout the duration of the Science Festival. The next one will be, we've got a few education events running during the day, but the next evening event will be on the 7th of July on Wednesday, and we're actually hosting that in partnership with National Museums Scotland, and we're going to be talking about our biobank and the wider CryoArcs initiative. And Helen Sen's actually going to be on that call as well, so do join us for that. And the following day, on Thursday, the 8th of July, same time as this one, 6 till 7:30, we're going to be having a Women in Conservation and Science panel. And you can hear from actually one of Donald's team, Roslyn, and we've also got our vets on there. We've got several other keepers and some of our conservation teams. So do join us for that. It's on Thursday, the 8th of July at 6 p.m. And we're also taking questions in advance for that one. So have a look out for social posts between now and then where you can send us in your questions. But thank you again so much for joining us. I hope you're enjoying the Science Festival. And I hope to see you in the audience at one of the future events. Thank you very much. Thanks all.